Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology with Mrs. Bancroft. This PowerPoint will give you the key tools to go through the entire course. Your assignment is to view this PowerPoint and follow along with your note sheet, taking down the notes where you see the blanks. Thank you. The definition of anatomy is the study of the structure of the body parts and their relationships to one another. For example, these would be things like the parts of the heart, the parts of the brain, the various bones in your body. This all refers to anatomy. The derivation of the word anatomy is derived from the Greek word meaning to cut apart. So when you think about anatomy, you're really thinking about how you're breaking up the body into different parts. There are two divisions of anatomy, gross anatomy and microscopic anatomy. Gross anatomy is the study of the larger body parts that are visible to the naked eye. So things like your heart, bones, your stomach, the lungs, eyes, these are all things that would be considered under gross anatomy. Microscopic anatomy then is things that are too small to see with your eye. So these would be tissues, cells, different parts of blood. So these would all be things that you would need to look up under a microscope in order to see. While anatomy is the study of the actual body parts and what they look like, physiology is defined as the study of how the parts of the body work and carry out their life-sustaining structures. For example, the anatomy of the heart has various veins and arteries coming and going. For example, the pulmonary vein, the superior and inferior vena cava. Physiology then would be how the blood flows through the heart, getting to different various parts of the body. Anatomy and physiology are complementary. Therefore, you cannot study one without technically studying the other. However, if you were to study one, you would really need to know more about anatomy first, and then physiology second. In the body, there are different levels of organization. What we start at is a basic chemical level. Things like your atoms are the smallest parts of matter. Atoms then are going to join together to form molecules. Molecules are things like H2O or CO2 or CO. And then macromolecules are your larger things, like if you remember from biology, things like proteins and carbohydrates that are essential to the body to function. All these macromolecules are eventually going to make up organelles, and organelles are going to function in a cell. Organelles are basically like organs for the cell. They're going to do jobs all together to make the cell function. A bunch of cells put together performing a same function are going to be tissues. The next unit that we will be studying is going to be tissues. There are 4 different types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Tissues then are going to make up organs. Organs are things like your heart, your brain, your stomach, your kidneys, and even bones. And blood. Yes, blood is actually an organ. We don't necessarily think of it because it's liquid, but it is an organ. Then organs all together working together for a specific function are going to make up the organ systems. In your body, you have 11 different systems that are going to function. And then all those organ systems together are going to make an organism. An organism is basically a human being. This picture just demonstrates the different levels of chemical and organization of life. So once again, we start off with the chemical level, then we go to the cells, the tissues, the organ system, and then lastly, we have the organism. In the human body, there are different life processes. For example, homeostasis is basically the tendency of the body to remain in a steady state. For example, you have a temperature in your body that is about 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take a few degrees. If your body is sick, that is actually going to rise to be able to fight off foreign invaders, but the body wants to go back to that 98.5 degrees. The same thing with the pH of your blood. The pH of your blood wants to remain in a relatively same range. If it were to go higher or lower than that range, the body would be under stress. Movement. We move with bones and muscles. They work together in order to help us move. Responsiveness to stimuli. For example, pain. If you are going to put your hand on a hot stove, which I don't recommend that you do, if you do that, your body is going to say, ow, and you're going to respond to that by moving your hand away. Same thing with if this room is cold, you may raise your hand and ask me to go get a sweatshirt from your locker. That is a response to a stimuli. Digestion is basically to break down your food. Your body ingests food on a daily basis, but it can't process the nutrients from that food until it breaks it down via different structures like your teeth, your stomach, and also your small intestine. Metabolism is defined as all the chemical reactions that occur in a body's cells. Basically, what happens is how quickly your body is burning energy and also using the nutrients that your body has taken in. This is done by things like cellular respiration, which means that you are breathing, giving off oxygen, and that your body is taking in that oxygen and using it for energy. It's going to turn your sugars into ATP via the oxygen that you take in, and then you're going to give off a byproduct of the CO2. This is also regulated by hormones and a structure known as your thyroid. In order to rid your body of waste, you need to excrete them, meaning that you need to get rid of these wastes via either your large intestine, which is basically going to get rid of undigestible waste, or you're going to filter the blood and take out the waste from the blood and excrete it via urine from your kidneys and also your bladder. Reproduction is asexual and sexual. Asexual does not require any sex cells, but rather it is a clone of the cell. For example, your skin cells are constantly doing this process. If you didn't, you would actually lose skin and not have any barrier to your body. This is done by something called mitosis. Sexual reproduction via sperm and egg is going to create a new life which is genetically different from the parent. It's a combination of those two parents put together. Lastly, we grow. We get taller. We get wider. We grow our nails. We grow our hair. And our bones grow in length as well. When you think about survival, we all think about what we would need in order to survive out in the wild. But this is what we need to survive on a daily basis. We need nutrients, which act as our fuel. Things like calcium and other substances that the body needs. Oxygen, which is required for cellular respiration and is required for our breathing. We need water. You cannot live without water for more than 2 to 3 days. Your body is actually 60 to 80% water. You need to maintain a normal body temperature, which we talked about before, of 98.6 degrees. And an atmospheric pressure is required for breathing. You will know that if you live in higher elevations, it is actually harder to breathe based on the pressure built up on your lungs. Some athletes actually, when they are training for Olympic running or other competitions, will actually train at higher altitudes because it actually helps them in the long run when they get down to a lower altitude. We briefly talked about homeostasis before, which is the body's ability to maintain a relatively stable internal condition within a changing environment. So this is things like your blood pressure, your temperature, okay? What actually happens is a lot of times something needs to respond to a stimuli. It goes to the control center, which is either in your spinal cord or in your brain, which is going to analyze the stimuli and thus respond to it. And then once it makes a decision on how to respond to this, it's done via something called an effector, which is either a muscle or a gland. An example of this is, once again, you are going to put your hand on a hot stove. You mistakenly do this. The stimuli is going to tell you that, wow, this is painful, this is hot. It is going to send a response to your brain. The brain is going to integrate this and say, okay, we need to do something about this. We need to pull our hand off of this hot stove because it is causing us pain. The effector then is going to actually carry out that decision via the arm muscles, which are going to actually lift your hand off that hot stove. In homeostasis, there are two loops. There is a negative feedback loop and a positive feedback loop. Negative feedback loops are much more common in the body. This is defined as the net effect is that the output of the systems shuts off the original stimulus or reduces the intensity. What is this really? Let's go on to the next slide and you will find out. In a normal body, under homeostasis, your blood glucose level is anywhere from 90 milligrams of glucose per 100 milliliters of blood. If your blood glucose level rises after eating, your pancreas is going to release insulin. It does not want your blood glucose level to rise. So what happens is the body cells are going to take up more glucose, and then the liver is also going to take up more glucose and store it as glycogen. By doing this, your blood is actually going to lose the glucose and it's going to go back to an original state. If the reverse happens, the blood glucose level or your blood sugar level drops below the set point, pancreas is then going to release a chemical or a substance called glucagon, and the liver is going to break down glycogen into glucose, raising your blood glucose level. So what a negative feedback loop is that something in the body is above or below what it should be, and the body is going to make a change to reverse that. This slide just goes over a high blood sugar level. Once again, your glucose level is high in the bloodstream. The insulin is produced in the pancreas, and the insulin then tells the cells to increase how much of the glucose they take in. By doing that, less glucose is in the blood, causing the level to go back to normal. If the reverse happens and you have low blood sugar, glucagon, which is a pancreatic hormone, is released. Glucagon triggers release of the glucose reserves in the liver, and they enter the bloodstream, raising the level of the blood sugar in the blood. Positive feedback loops are rare. Basically, what happens is that the stimulus is not shut off by the body. We don't try to reverse it. Instead, it continues until it has reached its endpoint. The response is going to accelerate and accelerate until the endpoint is reached. For example, a childbirth or blood clotting. With childbirth, what happens is the contractions get more and more intense until the body is actually going to rid itself of that baby and the endpoint is actually reached. This is just an example of what happens. Okay, the head of the fetus pushes against the cervix. This is going to tell the body via nerve impulses that the brain is going to stimulate the pituitary gland to secrete a chemical called oxytocin. Oxytocin is then carried into the bloodstream to the uterus, which is going to stimulate uterine contractions. This continues to get more and more intense until the baby is actually pushed through the birth canal. Once this occurs, the body has reached its set point and does not have uterine contractions anymore. In order for your body to continue maintaining life, hundreds of conditions must be maintained. Things like heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, and also blood levels of certain minerals, oxygen, and carbon dioxide must be within a certain range. For example, blood pressure. Blood pressure normally is, perfect blood pressure should be around 120/70. You can have about 100/65, 110/60, but it should not be above 120/70. People with high blood pressure sometimes need to take steps to lower their blood pressure, i.e. medicines. Breathing. You want to maintain a normal breathing pattern. If you're struggling to breathe, that could be a problem with your lungs. It could be a problem with sickness. So you want to maintain a normal breathing pattern in order to maintain your life. In anatomy, we talk about anatomical position. When a doctor comes in to examine you, or someone is laying on a surgical table, you want any doctor that comes in to have the same frame of reference when they are referring to your body. Much like the metric system is the standard system of measurement for the scientific community, anatomical position is the standard for doctors, scientists, anyone in the medical field. This is defined as the body is standing erect, meaning standing upright, with the feet together and arms at the side. The body's palms are facing forward, facing the observer. This is how you should refer to the body when you are talking about it. The purpose, once again, is that the directional terms refer to the body in this position and creates a standard for all scientists referring to the body. This is a picture of someone in anatomical position. Once again, they are facing the observer. They are standing upright. Their palms are at their facing forward and their arms are at their side. When we talk about the human body, there are different directional terms and terms of position that we refer to. For example, the first pair is superior and inferior. Superior means towards the head, and inferior means away from the head. So if we're talking about the eyes and the nose, we may say that the eyes are superior to the nose, meaning that the eyes are actually closer to the head than the nose. The reverse can be said for inferior. The nose is inferior to the eyes. Anterior or ventral means towards the front of the body, while posterior or dorsal means towards the back of the body. So if we're talking about the heart in relation to the spinal cord, we may say that the heart is anterior or ventral to the spinal cord. We could also say that the spinal cord is posterior to the heart. Next we have proximal and distal. Proximal means closer to the point of attachment, while distal means farther away from the point of attachment. Proximal means if we're talking about let's say the shoulder, we could say that the humerus is actually, or the head of the humerus is proximal to the elbow, okay, meaning that it's actually closer to the point of attachment. Also, we could say that with the knee, where the knee is attaching the tibia is proximal to the knee, or the metatarsals are distal to the tibia. Medial means closer to the midline. Lateral, which is on the next page, means farther away from the midline. Lateral and medial are the next pair of directional terms. If we look at the inside of the knee, we actually can say that that is medial to the body. Okay, lateral means farther away from the midline. So if we draw a line down the middle of our body, okay, whatever is closer to that midline is medial, like the inside of our ankle or the inside of our knee. Lateral means farther away from the midline. So the outside of our knee is actually lateral to the body. Next is superficial and deep. If something is towards the surface of the body, it's superficial. If something is deep within the body, that is actually deep. It's farther away from the surface. So for example, if you cut superficial blood vessels, they're right next to the skin, okay, or on top of the skin. If you are deep within the body, you are cutting deep into the skin layers and also sometimes into muscle. Next, we have visceral and parietal. Visceral is a membrane that is going to cover the organ right on top of it. Parietal means that it's going to line a body cavity. Once again, parietal is the membrane that covers the body cavity. So for example, you have a visceral pericardium and a parietal pericardium. Pericardium means it is the series of membranes that are going to cover the heart. Parietal is the one that is covering the cavity that the heart lies in. Visceral is the membrane that is covering the heart directly. It's laying directly right on top of the heart. The last two directional terms are supine and prone. If a body is laying face up, palms up, it is known as supine. If a body is laying face down, palms down, it is known as prone. Here we see a bunch of pictures that denote different directional terms. You can see the midline of the body, and medial is towards the midline, lateral is farther away. Proximal means closer to the point of attachment, distal means farther away. Anterior is closer to the front of the body, posterior is towards the back of the body. Superior once again means closer to the head, inferior means farther away from the head. In anatomy, we have certain planes of reference. In a sagittal plane, it divides the body into right and left portions. But a sagittal does not mean that it's equal portions. A mid-sagittal plane is going to divide the body into equal right and left halves. So basically, it's cutting directly down the body through the split between your eyes, down your nose, down your chest, and down your abdomen, making it into right and left equal halves. A coronal or a frontal plane divides the body into front and back. Transverse is the magician's cut. It's going to saw the body into top and bottom halves. Now, the next are referring to smaller parts of the body, i.e. a blood vessel or a vein or an artery, something that is smaller, not a whole body in reference. A cross section is basically going to cut a portion into right and left halves. So if you were to saw a blood vessel in half down the middle, you would see a cross section. Longitudinal means a hot dog cut. It's cutting it into top and bottom portions. And lastly, oblique allows you to see layers of something when you cut it at an angle. This diagram shows the various portions or planes of reference. The first is a mid-sagittal plane. It's cutting the body into right and left equal halves. The one in the center is going to be a coronal or a frontal plane. It's cutting the body into front and back halves. And lastly, we have a transverse plane, which is cutting the body into top and bottom portions. Here we have body regions. We have the cranium, which is the brain case, skull or head. We have the cervical region, which refers to the neck. Thorax is the chest. Abdomen is the abdominal region or the belly. Axilla is your armpit. Brachium is the upper part of your arm. Femoral is your thigh, and plantar is the sole of your foot. This just goes over the different regions and what you are going to be responsible for. What I would suggest for these is actually looking in your book and making flashcards. Here we have prefixes. So for example, a neurologist. Okay, that is someone that is going to study nerves. Myo means muscle. Gastric means stomach. So if you're a gastroenterologist, you're somebody that actually studies medicine referring to the stomach or the abdominal region. Hepatic means liver. Renal means kidney. Osteo means bone. So osteoporosis is the disease where you have brittle bone disease. Chondro is cartilage, pleural lung, and cardiac hearts. Next, we can divide the body into cavities. So we have the dorsal and the ventral cavities, which are the largest. So for example, let's say we were looking at a map of the earth, and I said, I want you to find Middlesex County, New Jersey. That's a very, very hard task if you don't have any idea where New Jersey is or Middlesex County. So how you direct somebody towards something is you might say, go to the top portion of the globe. They go to the top portion of the globe. Then you say, go to North America. And then they go to North America. And each time you give them a direction, you're getting more and more specific. For example, if we say, I want you to go to the heart. Well, if somebody has never seen the heart on a body, they don't know where they're looking. So you might want to say, I want you to go to the ventral cavity. This cavity is basically all organs or structures towards the front of the body. If you are directing somebody towards the back of the body, you are directing them to the to the dorsal cavity. The dorsal cavity only has two subdivisions, the vertebral, which is your spinal cord, and then also the cranial, which contains your brain. The ventral, however, is a lot more complex. After you go to the ventral, you can divide them into the thoracic and also the abdominopelvic. Both of these cavities are separated by a structure called the diaphragm. It's a sheet of muscle that helps you breathe. The thoracic then can get a little bit more specific, dividing into three different categories: the pleural, the mediastinum, and then also the pericardial. Abdominopelvic can get more specific as well. You have the abdominal region and then also the pelvic region. The abdominal holds things like your intestines, your stomach, your liver, your kidneys. The pelvic is your urinary bladder and your reproductive organs. This diagram goes on to show the different cavities. Once again, you can see the front of the body towards the right is showing you the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity, which together make up the abdominal pelvic cavity. And then you have the front of the chest, which has three different cavities: the pleural cavity, which houses the lungs, the pericardial, which houses the heart, and the mediastinum, which gives you your trachea, your esophagus, and also your thyroid gland. Towards the back of the body, you have your dorsal on your left, which shows you your cranial cavity and also your vertebral canal. Membranes lining body cavities. Once again, these are called serous and fibrous. Serous contain two layers, which are separated with a fluid to reduce any type of friction. The parietal is going to touch the cavity, whereas the visceral is going to cover the organ. Think back to a couple slides ago when I talked about the pericardial cavity. The parietal pericardium is covering the actual cavity that lines the heart. The visceral pericardium is lying directly on top of the heart. The fibrous membrane is a tough connective tissue for protection. Examples are your pericardium, your pleura, which is the serous membranes of the lungs, and then your peritoneum, which is basically serous membranes of your abdomen. Also, we have another one that is not on the slide. It's called the meninges. The meninges are tough membranes that are going to cover your brain and spinal cord. This diagram shows the various organ systems of the body. Like I said, there are 11 of them, and they all work together to function and help function the organism. Directional terms for four-legged critters, i.e. your dogs and your cats. Superior is going and anterior is towards the head. Inferior or caudal and also posterior is toward the tail. Dorsal is toward the back, or basically the back of that person. The back of that animal. And then the ventral is towards the belly, or down. And this diagram just shows these. Thank you for viewing this presentation. Please have filled out your note sheet and have it ready for class and discussion tomorrow.